It's difficult to label one individual as the most dangerous prisoner in the world. There is perhaps no one person who can be considered the most dangerous because the title can be given to any number of people for different reasons. Some prisoners are considered quite dangerous to one another and to guards inside a prison. Others might be notorious criminals whose reputation and extensive network allows them to control the lives of other people in and outside of the prison walls. And yet another kind of dangerous prisoner is one who spends his incarceration time plotting new crimes. Also, others are dangerous for their ability to escape the confines of even a famous prison that seems impenetrable. The United States has about 1.3 million people locked away in prisons, with some 700,000 there for violent crimes. If you think you know someone who deserves the title of the most dangerous prisoner, you may find out where they are held by doing a nationwide inmate search. But there is one man. Thomas Silverstein was the most violent prisoner in the world. He began his criminal career with armed robberies in the 1970s and ended it in 2019 when he died in prison after 36 years of solitary confinement. For many years, Silverstein was considered the country's most dangerous prisoner due to his crimes both outside and inside of the prison. Outside of prison, he was a habitual criminal whose offenses were increasingly violent. By the age of 25, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison and was held at Leavenworth, where he formed ties to the Aryan Brotherhood gang. He was convicted in 1980 of murdering a fellow inmate who refused to aid the gang's drug smuggling enterprise. Transferred to the maximum security unit at Marion, Illinois, he was further involved in the murder of a rival gang leader and the murder of a guard. Marion was put on lockdown that lasted more than 20 years because of Silverstein, who got transferred later to maximum security in Atlanta with the caveat that he had no human contact in solitary confinement. He was eventually sent back to Leavenworth and later to ADX Florence, where he died. During the 1987 Atlanta prison riots, Cuban detainees at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary released Silverstein from his isolation cell. They handed Silverstein over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's hostage rescue team 1 week later. The Bureau of Prison officials were reportedly afraid that Silverstein would begin killing correctional officers held hostage by the Cubans. Before the Cubans released Silverstein to the Bureau of Prisons, the Cubans let Silverstein out of his isolation cell, and Silverstein was able to roam freely about the prison. One of the prison guards being held hostage had a history of being kind to Silverstein. When the guard would handcuff Silverstein, he would make it a point to ask Silverstein if his handcuffs were too tight. He was confronted by Silverstein and was ultimately spared by him. Bureau of Prisons negotiators were able to convince the Cuban riot leaders to hand over Silverstein as a gesture of good faith, a relatively easy decision for them given that Silverstein's status was peripheral to the aims of the Cuban leaders during the riot. Silverstein was subsequently moved back to Leavenworth, where he stayed for the next 18 years. In 2005, when USP Leavenworth was downgraded to a medium security facility, Silverstein was moved to ADX Florence, a supermax facility in Colorado. His earliest theoretical date of release was November 2, 2095. Silverstein was born in Long Beach, California, to Virginia Conway. Conway had divorced her first husband in 1952 while pregnant with Silverstein and married Thomas Conway, whom Silverstein claimed was his biological father. 4 years later, Virginia divorced Conway and married Sid Silverstein, who legally adopted her son. Silverstein grew up a timid, awkward, shy, and frequently bullied child in the middle-class neighborhood where the family lived, in part because his peers mistakenly believed he was Jewish. Virginia Silverstein demanded that her son fight back, telling the boy that if he ever came home again crying because he'd been beaten up by a bully, she would be waiting to give him another beating. Silverstein stated, "That's how my mom was. She stood her mud. If someone came at you with a bat, you got your bat and you both went at it." At age 14, Silverstein was sentenced to a California Youth Authority reformatory where he said his attitudes about violence were reinforced. Anyone not willing to fight was abused. In 1971, at age 19, Silverstein was sent to San Quentin Prison in California for armed robbery. 4 years later, he was paroled, but he was arrested soon after along with his father Thomas Conway and his cousin Gerald Hoff for 3 armed robberies. Their take was less than $11,000, about $53,000 when adjusted for inflation in 2022. In 1977, Silverstein was sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery to be served at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Silverstein himself claimed that the no human contact status is essentially a form of torture reserved for those who kill correctional officers. Ted Sellers, a former convict who met Silverstein during 25 years spent in prison, said he became a legend at Leavenworth. Sellers told BBC News Online, He is not as bad as they portray. Sure, he is dangerous if they push him to the wall, but there were some dirty, rotten guards at Marion. They would purposely screw you around. You're dealing with a person locked up 23 hours a day. Of course he's got a short fuse. Why is he then considered very dangerous? In the US, the federal government constructed a supermax ADX prison at Florence, Colorado, with the intent of holding the most dangerous prisoners. Now it has become a famous prison for features like sound-dampening construction and tiny windows that don't allow prisoners to communicate with one another or to figure out their precise locations within the building. All inmates are shackled even when allowed an hour outside of their cells to exercise in a cement pit, approximately the size of a swimming pool. The prison holds more than 400 at full capacity, but is currently housing just over 350 individuals. Due to their high level of dangerousness and long sentences, prisoners here may not show up on a nationwide inmate search, as information about the ADX facility is closely guarded. ADX Florence is intended as a temporary holding location to teach the most high-risk prisoners appropriate behavior before they are transferred to other penitentiaries. However, many are long-time residents of the facility due to their potential to inspire new criminals or direct crimes at the slightest chance of communication to those outside the walls. Among the most notorious believed to be there are Unabomber Theodore Ted Kaczynski, a recluse who sent mail bombs to university researchers for decades because he hated advancements in science; marathon bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, a young immigrant to Boston who, with his brother Tamerlan, conceived and carried out the domestic terrorism bombing near the finish line of the 2013 Boston Marathon. That incident killed 3 and injured 250 in a large crowd. The perpetrators used a pressure cooker packed with explosives and shrapnel. His brother was killed in a police shootout days later. Zacharias Masaoui, who is serving 6 life sentences for assisting the hijackers who carried out the September 11, 2001 attacks in the World Trade Center. Ramzi Youssef, who was convicted in 1994 of the first World Trade Center bombing that killed 6 and injured 1,000, as well as another plot to blow up dozens of planes. He is serving life plus 240 years. Umar Abdul Mutallab, a Nigerian national connected to Al-Qaeda who is serving 4 life sentences plus 50 years for attempting to bomb an airliner using explosives hidden in his underwear, earning him the Underwear Bomber nickname. Terry Nichols, the partner of Timothy McVeigh who created a bomb from fertilizer and blew up the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma in 1995, killing over 150 people. McVeigh, a military veteran who was unhappy about the FBI's assault on religious extremists at Waco, Texas, was sentenced to death. James Marcello, a Chicago Mafia figure who participated in the murders of 18 people as well as extortion and bribery, is serving a life sentence. And Gary Hoover, who is serving 6 life sentences for activities as the leader of the Gangster Disciples in the 1970s, as well as continuing criminal activities and directing the gang from prison through the 1990s. If you enjoyed the video, do like and share with your friends. Subscribe and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on more exciting stories coming your way.